The White House announced today that President Obama will not meet with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu when the Prime Minister comes to Washington to address a joint session of Congress in March. A spokesperson for the National Security Council said, as a matter of longstanding practice and principle, we do not see heads of state or candidates in close proximity to their elections so as to avoid the appearance of influencing a democratic election in a foreign country. For the same reason, Secretary of State John Kerry will also refrain from meeting with Netanyahu. Today, the Israeli Prime Minister officially accepted House Speaker John Boehner's invitation to address Congress on March 3rd. That's just 2 weeks before his re-election, the re-election in Israel on March 17th. Speaker Boehner invited Netanyahu without first consulting President Obama or any of the Democratic congressional leadership. White House Press Secretary Josh Earnest said again today that the manner in which Netanyahu was invited was a departure from protocol. Today, NBC News senior White House correspondent Chris Jansing spoke to the National Security Advisor Ben Rhodes about the Netanyahu invitation.
We were surprised to learn about it from Speaker Boehner. It's not unusual for a foreign leader to speak to the Congress, particularly a close ally like Israel. Usually we don't find out when it's announced by the Speaker.
So just a political poke from John Boehner?
Well, you'll have to ask John Boehner. It's certainly the first time that's happened in the 6 years that I've been working here, where you had, again, a high-profile foreign visit like that announced, not out of the White House here, but by the Speaker.
Joining me now is Daily Beast columnist Mike Tomasky, also Phyllis Bennis, the director of the New Internationalism Project at the Institute for Policy Studies. Mike, I have never seen an invitation issued like this to a head of state to address a joint session of Congress, and it turns out the original invitation from Boehner was for February, and Netanyahu pushed it up into March, even closer, much closer, to the election day and night in Israel.
2 weeks from the election, he pushed it to, coinciding with the big AIPAC conference here in Washington, which will also happen in early March. But Lawrence, I think you're quite right. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like this, and it's hard to read this as anything other than an attempt to subvert, or at least thwart, Obama's foreign policy goal, and Obama being the president, this is to say the United States' foreign policy goal of striking some kind of a nuclear deal with Iran, because this is the ostensible subject of Netanyahu's talk to Congress, and he's obviously going to go there and he's going to say this is a terrible idea, and the Republicans are going to give him rapturous applause. Probably a few small smattering of Democrats too, but mostly Republicans are going to give him absolutely rapturous applause. And it's really an in-your-face gesture at the President of the United States, siding with the head of another state against the President, basically.
Yeah, I said last night, this looks like the Republicans are simply having this be their response to the State of the Union address, literally delivering a foreign head of state to the same spot where the president stood during his State of the Union address. And Mike, you said some Democrats will be applauding the Netanyahu position on Iran. One of those is Senator Bob Menendez, Democratic senator from New Jersey. Let's listen to what he said about the president's comments about Iran in the State of the Union address.
I have to be honest with you. The more I hear from the administration and its quotes, the more it sounds like talking points that come straight out of Tehran. And it feeds to the Iranian narrative of victimization when they are the ones with original sin. An illicit nuclear weapons program going back over the course of 20 years that they are unwilling to come clean on.
Phyllis Bennis, there's Senator Menendez accusing the White House, his phrase, using talking points coming out of Tehran. That sounds like something beneath the dignity of Ted Cruz.
There's no dignity here. You know, Lawrence, there's nothing dignified about these kinds of attacks. What they're trying to do is make a partisan gesture out of an incredibly dangerous foreign policy move. What we're talking about here, we're going to be seeing Netanyahu in the Congress 2 days after the next deadline in these talks with Iran. The next deadline is March 1st. There's supposed to be a framework agreement by that time. which would then go on till July 1st to have all the implementation arranged. That's a very tight deadline. And the notion that Netanyahu is going to come deliberately to undermine the possibility that an agreement could go through between the U.S. and its allies, the Perm 5+1, as they call it, which means the 5 permanent members of the United Nations, the U.S., Britain, France, China, and Russia, plus Germany, are the negotiating sides. On the other side is Iran. Israel is not part of those negotiations. And the idea that Netanyahu believes that he has the right not to just interfere in the internal affairs of the United States Congress, but the notion that he has the right globally to try and scuttle this global negotiation is absolutely an outrage. What we're looking at is the possibility that there could be a real undermining of the chance for an agreement. And we should be clear here, Lawrence, that if there is no agreement with Iran and new sanctions by the Congress will scuttle any new agreement, that will definitely be true. If that happens, the alternative is war as a very likely possibility. So what we're seeing is that members of Congress who want Netanyahu to come, knowing that he represents not only his own political position, whatever that might be, but a country whose official position, despite what Secretary Kerry claimed, that we and Israel see things the same way, we just disagree on how to get there, Israel has a completely different strategic goal vis-a-vis Iran. Israel's goal, officially, is to prevent Iran from having ever the capacity to build a nuclear weapon any time in the future, whether it's 10 years, 1 year, or 100 years from now. That's not the U.S. position. The U.S. position is to make sure Iran does not get a nuclear weapon. There's a vast cavern between those two positions. And the notion that the Congress, and this will be bipartisan, I'm afraid, as we just heard from Senator Menendez, that the Congress may see it in its interest and its rights to undermine U.S. foreign policy when there is the chance of a real negotiated solution to this long-standing crisis is a thoroughly unbelievable thing to be seeing.
Mike Tomasky, the president has said he would veto any additional sanctions that that Congress might pass.
He has, and presumably he will. You know, Lawrence, this is a really interesting throwdown. Interesting is one word for it, by Netanyahu at Obama. Now, I talked to a journalist friend of mine in Israel today who thinks it's not so much directed at Obama on Netanyahu's behalf. He thinks it's all about getting reelected, and he just wants to get reelected and get his coalition, his governing coalition, in the Knesset. I'll take his word for it. He knows. But sitting here in Washington, it's pretty hard for me not to read this in some respects, to some degree, as Netanyahu just almost taunting Obama and daring him. You know, there is talk in some liberal circles, in some pro-peace circles, of the U.S. someday getting to the point where maybe it has to reconsider some of the aspects of its relationship with Israel, the $3 billion a year, the automatic support at the United Nations. Right now, that's just talk around the edges. But if Netanyahu tests this relationship, it'd be interesting to see where this might go.
Phyllis, King Abdullah of Saudi Arabia died today at age 90. Apparently he will be replaced by his brother, age 79. It seems as though this will make no difference in the affairs of Saudi Arabia.
I don't know if we can assume that, Lawrence. I think that what we've seen in the recent months has been that Prince Salman, the heir apparent who will take over for Abdullah, has been running the show for a while, and as we just heard, he's almost 80. The king was 90. This is a sclerotic monarchy. The young people are so far down in the hierarchy that they're not likely to take the throne for many, many years. By that time, they'll be very old. So this is a very problematic monarchy in a host of ways. I mean, this is the monarchy that is responsible for beheading people. That's how they carry out their punishments. They are whipping people as part of their punishments. So this is a backward, reactionary, misogynistic administration. That's not going to change. What could change is some shift in the relationship with Iran. We might see a bit of a pull back into a more internal mode, at least temporarily, which could mean that the tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran that shapes a great deal of what's happening in Syria right now, what's happening in Iraq right now, certainly what's happening in this issue around the Iran nuclear negotiations, all of that we could see some shift as Saudi Arabia comes to terms with a new stage in its absolute monarchy.
Mike Tomasky and Phyllis Bennis, thank you both very much for joining me tonight.